I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
Ken is fun, and Ken is a great friend to Barbie.
There's no empathy measure on most people's performance reviews. But if you don't have that, I think it's almost impossible to be an excellent marketer.
The brand manager is the general manager of the brand.
I was this fat unit, you know what I mean, in a suit, and it was clear that I was not the same as the others.
Welcome everybody and hello. It's episode 31 of WFA's Better Marketing, and just to show that even the WFA has cost cutting despite the fact that we're sitting in the same city, we're actually doing this remotely, which is a bit of a shame because I couldn't be more delighted to welcome two of the finest advertising and marketing journalists I've ever met in the world, I hasten to add, in Claire Beale and Sonoo Singh. They both have storied careers. Claire, for a long time, editor and editor-in-chief at Campaign, and Sonoo in Marketing Week, The Drum and other places, but they've always covered creativity and marketing with passion, and it's ironic that I get to do it the other way around and ask you. So, you know, you're here almost 4 years into the Creative Salon, so can I just ask you to tell us about the Creative Salon, what its purpose is, what you're up to? Yeah. But great to see you both. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, David. We launched. Shall I?
Yes, good.
Obviously, there's going to be interruptions and things with me and Sonoo because we interrupt each other a lot and finish each other's sentences a lot. But we launched Creative Salon at the tail end of COVID. I'd been made redundant from Campaign. Managed to lure Sonoo out of the Drum to come and join me. And our big ambition was, and still very much is, to support the industry, support great people doing brilliant work that drives growth for businesses, to make the case for commercial creativity as an economic lever that's vital to brand building, but also to the economy, and to do our bit to give back by helping the next generation of diverse talent get a foothold in the industry, feel it's a vibrant place that they want to work, and give them roots in. So we take a portion of our profits and give them to organisations working with next-gen diverse talent. So that was kind of the starting point for the whole thing. Really.
Yeah. Also, you know, to add to that, we are very much, both Claire and I are very much the products of the industry. So, and we've been championed and supported. Indeed, David, you've been very much part of my career and my career journey. So we've been championed and supported by some very, very good people in the industry, both on the client side and the agency side. So that was very much part of our DNA, making that, beating the drum for commercial creativity for the industry as well. And also, I must add that we both started as each other's nemesis, and we are now, we are a couple now without the sex, obviously. But it's that coming together of two people who tried not to acknowledge each other in the room, because obviously we were very, very fierce rivals, but clearly that came out of respect. And when we first started, Creative Salon was actually a name that Claire had for the business, and when we first started talking about it, she said that's the name I have in my mind. And the salon is a nod to the Parisian salons that were run by women who did not have agency, whether socially, indeed financially, or politically or otherwise, and they used to get the good and the great. That led to the Age of Enlightenment eventually around their salons. So it's very much part of the essence of what we do as a business, where we do get the good and the great and some of the most interesting people around tables. Right now we are sitting in our salon, because the Creative Salon does have its own salon in Little Venice, where we do hold these soirees. And I remember it was all kind of written somewhere, because I remember going back home and saying, I'm leaving and I'm starting a business with Claire Beale, and it's called Creative Salon. And I think my son turned around and he said, "Oh, yes, it's very original, isn't it? Because it's C for Claire and S for Sonoo. So it was all sort of kind of almost preordained. So I think they're lovely stories to how we did come together as well, and we are certainly growing as a business. Yes, we will be announcing some heavyweight other titans of the industry as well coming on board on Creative Salon as well. So yes, very exciting third year we're entering in April.
And are you happy with things so far? I have to, as you know, I'm a fan.
Thank you.
Voracious reader of everything you write, and of those you bring together as a community. And I suspect that many of our global readers won't have enjoyed the Creative Salon as much as they should. So how do people access it if they don't know the Creative Salon? Tell our listeners how they can get part of it.
Well, there are several aspects to our business. As Sonoo said, some of it is very much physical and intimate and bringing people together and creating community. But we have a publishing platform which is completely open access, which not many platforms writing about our industry are completely open access. But anyone can go onto our site and read what we write. And that serves our mission for making the case for the power of creativity and attracting talent to the industry. And it's really important that everything we write that champions the industry is shared as widely as possible and is seen by as many people as possible. Actually, our traffic to our website is, on a very average day, at least 25% of it's from the US, and often more.
Great.
And we look at our stats on a probably hourly basis, and we see the little flags of where people are tuning in from, and we have a global audience. It's not in the millions yet, but it's fast growing, but it is international. Our platform is called creative.salon, and anyone can take a look.
Yeah, I also want to add to it that also the other thing with Creative Salon is that there are reputations attached to it. Let's not forget, this is Claire Beale, so the industry knows Claire. Again, I've been around as well. So in that way, even outside the UK, there are reputations. There are people. There are lots of obviously expats outside of the UK who are running agencies, indeed client-side businesses as well, and also a lot of. As you would know, a lot of global or indeed regional CMOs tend to sit in, if not in London, in the UK. So in that term, in those terms, our audience is kind of far-reaching. It's we might have a base which is London-centric, but definitely it's far-ranging than that.
But it is fascinating, isn't it? Because it's so frustrating when I go onto other platforms and they entice you with an article, but you then can't get it unless you subscribe.
Yes.
Even the subscription.
Thanks for making it all open.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there are an endless series of articles and the ongoing polemic about the death of creativity. And I'd love to hear, what your view of that is. But I love the fact that you talk about commercial creativity, because it's a reminder to all of us that that's what it's there for. But what's your view? Because, here we are in another week where there's a gloom and doom piece about what's happening to the industry and marketing and creativity.
I think, obviously, creativity is alive and thriving. If anything, it's become more democratized than when I started out writing about the industry. The word creativity used to have a very narrow application, but we have media agency members that would consider themselves very creative and want to be part of Creative Salon because what they do is creative. We have a series called Most Creative Marketers where we celebrate the creativity within the marketing function. So I think as the years have gone on, what creativity has taken on a much broader definition. Obviously, the nature of media means that there are fewer of those kind of shared major creative moments because we're not all sitting down watching ITV on a Saturday night in the same way, and creativity has had to adapt to become a much more speedy solution in many cases that's personalized and targeted across hundreds of platforms and different executions. So the nature of it has changed, but I don't think the quality of it has changed, or the caliber of the people creating it has changed. It's just harder to find in those mass moments.
I think also it is fair to say that because there is a breadth of creative thinking, which doesn't have that neat little box that can be sort of written up as a press release, and then you've got sort of 6 different outlets all writing the same headline, and in a way it is actually almost like a compelling headline sometimes. It's quite convenient to say the death of creativity, or indeed the death of marketing. And I think there has been a certain, because of the business models that a lot of publications, and we should know that, and I work for most of them, as you said, the business model of these publications means that they need those clickbaits. So there has been, I think, this sort of rise of self-flagellating kind of headlines, which just keep on pronouncing the death of whatever that might be. I mean, we were with a big agency just this afternoon, and a lot of sort of creative moments, or a lot of things that they had created were quite surprising to both of us.
Yeah, and they're things that appear as a book or a film or a piece of PR. That's when I started writing about creativity quite a few years ago. Those weren't part of the industry, and they are now, and that's hugely exciting that a big creative agency will sit down and talk to you about publishing a book on behalf of one of their clients, or creating a particular sound effect that they've kind of invented the technology behind. It's just a different definition of creativity.
Yeah. Could I also add, I think, David, we need probably more marketers like yourself. So there is, every time those headlines are written that creativity is dead, the responsibility is always placed on the agency world, and it's the Adland, the fault of Adland. But at no point, does a kind of marketer come up and sort of say, there's some kind of responsibility that needs to be taken by the client community as well, as to how much they're investing in sort of risk-taking, in failures, in experimentation. Everyone is talking about AI innovation, but then it just kind of gets to the sameness of it. So I think it needs to be a shared responsibility as well, and it's not just the fault of agencies or Adland. So we probably need more of you, David.
Oh, well, listen, I think there are plenty, but it's interesting because the piece that you've got in this week's missive from the Cannes survey, where actually a lot of clients, and I'll describe them as a lot of middle-ranking clients, saying, look, it's not our fault, it's our leadership fault, it's the CEO's fault, or it's always somebody else's fault. And I think this championing of creativity can be done at every level, but there's no doubt that unless you've got the top of the house converted to the power of creativity, you're going to struggle. And I was remembering, Sonoo, as I was preparing for this, I think, was it in 2003 that P&G flew you out to Cincinnati, when P&G had decided it was time for them to get creativity, and look what happened later. But it's remarkable. It's over 20 years ago. Can you? What were they talking about then? I mean, because they did have a radical conversion. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, I mean the intent was slightly different in the sense because obviously very good journalist. I had been breaking a lot of stories, which I wasn't breaking embargoes. I was just good, so I was breaking a lot of stories. But they weren't ready at the time to talk about those launches or talk about all those initiatives. But also, I think they did have a moment of reckoning at the time where they flew myself and another, I think, from Press Association, and the idea was to open their doors and get their marketers to talk to journalists and really talk about the aspirations they had for the marketers themselves, and so everything from product to design to innovation of the product itself, to creativity and the execution of creativity. I mean, I went to nappy factories, soap factories, and because I was there for about 10 days. It was such an immersive time, but that was also the time when the first day, I still remember, they were showing us how, as a business, they don't have any cabins with doors. So they all had open plan. And that was such a big thing at the time that all of a sudden everything is out in the open and they're sharing, their best practices, not just internally, but with the outside world as well.
But there's no doubt that they embraced then the power of commercial creativity, and they continue to. But I think that the headline is this: there's a communication breakdown between agencies and clients. I tend to disagree with that. I mean, I actually do think the clients must take a lot more responsibility for this, because it's the clients that need to say yes, and indeed internally need to convince their colleagues that there is more money and more growth to be made by better creativity than by churning out the same as everybody else.
I mean, look at what happened to Reckitt Benckiser as well when they started investing in creativity, and it wasn't just about the volume sales; it was so much more beyond that. They in terms of creative rankings, in terms of better products, in terms of kind of the brand visibility of their products. I mean, that worked in their favor. There's quite an interesting piece in System One did, I think, yesterday or this week, talking about how car advertising has become so boring. But again, to your point, it needs to be driven by the brands themselves and the marketers in terms of what they actually want and the audience that they want to engage with.
I mean, all the research is there and it has been there for years, but I think the message is finally starting to land that the most creative work is also the most effective work. But that is certainly a message that needs to be, we can't take the foot off the accelerator on that in terms of driving that message into client boardrooms. It still needs to be said.
Yeah, well, one of the things I heard about last week, which I was very excited to hear about, is that in Spain, they're actually looking at changing the law so that investment in marketing gets treated in the same way as investment in research and development. In other words, you can put it on your balance sheet and it's tax protected, because of course it's still true that the laziest companies cut the easiest thing to cut, and that's usually the marketing budget. And it would be magnificent if that were protected, because I think all the help that the industry can get is good help, but I do think it goes down to leadership. But so violent agreement on that one. I also think, part of your founding purpose, and I know you continue to do this because it's wonderful that you're putting money into it, is championing the cause of diversity and inclusion. And again, most of the pieces I've read will say, yes, some progress, but not enough. I mean, can you talk to us all about that? Where do you see the industry? What else can we do to accelerate diversity and inclusion and indeed equality in our industry?
Well, I think it has to be business critical to everybody involved. So I'm a big advocate of trying to bake it as much as possible in a contract stage, so that it's part of the client agency relationship up front, that there will be diverse teams, and that's part of the nuts and bolts of doing business, is that teams have to be as diverse as humanly possible.
Yes, I mean, I must confess, I'm an immigrant, came to the UK in 2000, and I have to confess, I haven't called it out or haven't being an active flag bearer as such, because as an immigrant, the default mode really is elbows out or fit in, and I think maybe Claire would agree, I've been more elbows out than fitting in. and you know me well enough, David, to know that's been the case. But what that also means is, I think the bit that the industry, the society at large, almost forgets is that there isn't a universal experience for everybody. And I think that is the big challenge when, as an industry or as a business, you have certain processes in place. Where do you kind of begin? It's not an easy answer to fix. There are no easy answers, which is why I think these questions need to be continually asked, and therefore some change. But also, I would add that now, as women of a certain age, there are so when we talk about diversity, we don't even address things like intersectionality, for instance. Then there's ageism on top of that, all of those things. So these are huge challenges for any. I don't think there is a parallel to any other industry other than sort of advertising media, who kind of are continually asking themselves these questions, and the level of interrogation that happens. I mean, when Claire and I sort of started in the industry, we could count, not on even one hand, on one finger, say the number of women on top of the businesses. Now, when Claire and I do these salon suppers, the majority of business leaders sometimes happen to be women. I mean, that is a huge step change that needs to be celebrated. But you are right. The championing of it needs to carry on. The questioning, the interrogation needs to carry on.
Yeah, and you're right. Intersectionality is such an important dimension. We've got a lot more female leaders, but not enough diversity amongst those women, let alone, anyway. It's a big topic, but one of the things that we feel very passionately about is making sure that that this is an attractive industry to young, diverse talent to want to come into. So that's why we do what we're doing, to try and draw them in and give them, present them with the opportunities and support them once they're engaged. But it's that's going to take a generation at least to actually turn into leadership, diversity at leadership level. But the work has to start now, and it has to be meaningful, and it has to be business critical. If it's not, the tap's not just suddenly turned off when times are tough.
No, but I do think most boards have now correctly got targets to make sure that they're addressing this issue. I mean, I think I've said this to you before, Sonoo, when I arrived at what was then RBS, it was the first time that all of my direct reports were male. I was astonished, actually. And when I left, it was 50-50, just as it should be, with other things in there. Because unless you set about actually making change happen, it doesn't. But I do think, what you're doing to keep this industry attractive should be recognised and called out, because that also worries me that we're not getting enough talent into the pipeline, because it's always been, especially the advertising side of the fence, I would say there's always been fantastically diverse, interesting people, and they're what's made it such a powerhouse of a business to work in. Unless it remains attractive, why would people do it? So can you talk about what you're up to? What are you seeing?
So just to conclude that point, David, I think it is huge strides have been met in terms of trying to bring diverse talent in. It's actually looking after it, making those people feel that they belong once they're in, is the challenge that very definitely still remains as well.
Yes, that's what we're hearing from a lot of businesses, is they do have a pipeline, but making sure that they stay in, how they stay in, and whether that's a generational challenge as well. Maybe that's sort of compounded by that in terms of the expectations that they have of workplace to the kind of expectations that we had. It was almost a level of servitude when we first started. And that doesn't happen anymore. So I think there's lots of factors and layers. I suppose what we're also saying is it is a very nuanced conversation, and for businesses as well, because as much as it is business critical, they need to start having these nuanced conversations and debates, and making sure those places themselves have safe spaces where people feel on both sides, or all the sides, people feel that they can ask questions, they can pose questions, as well. So I think that there needs to be a starting point there.
I mean, I was delighted to see the reinvention of the full service agency, albeit in a slightly different guise. And I like Johnny Hornby's quote about, whose idea was it to stop this anyway? But, that is heavily tech driven as well. What are you thinking about the impact of tech on our industry, and how are you hearing people talk about
Huge levels of excitement, and obviously some trepidation about what it means for individuals' jobs. But I think we're in a transition phase, aren't we? Which is always what makes people nervous. I think most people feel that the opportunities longer term are very powerful and important to the industry. It's just getting there might be a little bit messy. Everybody that we've spoken to is very clear that the human element is going to be the thing that makes the difference, the thing that makes something magical and attractive rather than lowest common denominator and bland and kind of feeling off the shelf. So there's a lot of confidence that people will remain absolutely critical. But yeah, a lot of excitement.
Yes, absolutely. I think the excitement is more, I would say, from the agency side. Not only are they investing in all the new technologies, they are experimenting with some of the bigger ones, obviously, who do have the resources, are kind of they are testing, trialing, failing as well. I think a little bit of nervousness sits more on the client side, and some of the clients we're talking to, some of the marketers we're talking to, are almost unsure or somewhat unsure of the kind of questions they need to be asking. So there's a lot of kind of sort of plugging away from the agency side, where they're sort of, this is the new tech thing that we've just invested, or a holding group has invested in. I think what the clients or the marketers don't know is how that is therefore going to help them, if not today, tomorrow. But the other interesting bit, actually adding to that point of people also, is the agencies are realizing, or at least the smarter ones are realizing, that there's going to be fundamentally a skills gap with all these new technologies coming in. So it's not going to be mass redundancies or mass layoffs, but how do you play with these, and what kind of skills you might need. So there are lots of interesting conversations happening on that side as to what are the kind of skills. So I genuinely do think clients really need to plug into their agencies to almost ask them the questions: what new skills are you looking at, or where are you looking at talent next? Because that's where they need to be plugging into as well.
We've been doing a big piece of research on behalf of one of our partners into all of the investment that's being made in data and technology by the holding companies. So we've been speaking to marketers, intermediaries, influencers in the industry. And the general feeling is that technology becomes a kind of hygiene, that ultimately everyone will have access to more or less the same tech, the same data sources, the same tools for the trade. The difference that everybody is identifying is the people that are using them and the people that are running the companies that are providing the service. And the idea that people are buying people, and that clients are wanting to work with a management team rather than a suite of tools, still holds true and will hold true, which is such a good thing to hear.
Yeah, and even the AI businesses themselves. I was listening to this interview that the NVIDIA CEO was doing, and he said, "Oh, people, can you please stop investing in coding? Because I've given you the tools, I've given you AI. The smarter people will still remain smart because they would know how best to use the tools." So it's even the ones selling the tool know that ultimately it'll be the creative brains, it'll be the thinkers, it'll be the risk takers that will prevail eventually.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before you joined about exactly this point, that technology is a tool last year, I was asked to do a speech on the future of marketing, so I thought I would put that into ChatGPT to see what it said, and what came back was perfectly acceptable. But when I gave it the framework that I had come up with to do my 6 charts, what came back was really good. And actually I used one of the things as the summary chart. But it's a smart tool in the right hand. So I'm with you. I don't see it as a threat. I see it as a glorious opportunity. But perhaps you can help us, because one of the things we're going to be talking about at the WFA Congress in Toronto in May is the CMO the most impossible job? And love your views on that. And also, to kind of help bring us to an end here, what do you think a CMO should have top of their agenda? What should they be focusing on? But kind of sweeping thing there, if you could touch on, do you see it as an impossible job, and what do you think they should be focusing on?
It should be an impossible job. It should be the most important job, therefore an impossible job, and therefore should get that halo effect that it needs. And kind of, I mean, we did write a big conversation piece. I'll let you talk about it in a minute. But also going back to something we were discussing earlier, if ever there were a function that had all the research across decades of why it is business critical, why it needs to be funded, why it is critically the most important part of the business and the brand eventually, I think that's got to be marketing. And whatever you call it, whatever name you might call it, the fundamentals of marketing, the whether you call it 4 Ps, you start calling it something else, the fundamentals of marketing, the best marketers who do the job of marketing, which is so much beyond what is marketing these days as well. I mean, they're being asked, that role is elevated. So you could be called the CEO like Starbucks is doing, but it's fundamentally still the job of marketing to the people that you need to be selling your product and making them your sort of loyal customers as well. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a marketing job done on marketing, really, because I totally agree. It should be attracting the brightest talent.
Yes.
It should be commanding really high salaries. It should have status internally in brand owner companies that it doesn't always have. It's not always a board level position anymore, as we know. So I think there is a job that we should collectively be doing to raise the status of marketing. There was a lot of chatter over the last few days about the death of the CMO. I think that goes to Sonoo's point about the titles may change, morph into new titles, but the job itself of building brands across the long term is as important as it ever was, and the opportunities to do it are more interesting and exciting and creative than ever before. It should be the job that a bright young graduate is desperate to take on.
No, I agree with that. And listen, I share your optimism and passion for this. So let's hope that we can stop this endless polemic about the death of marketing, because I don't see many accountants worrying about the death of, the CFO, for instance. Well, listen, with that, I think, what a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time. Every success for the Creative Salon, and long may you keep writing the great things you're writing. Great to see you both. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for your
so
support
much.
as
Thank
well.
you, David.
Thank you.
Another great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to the next one, which is going to be with Asmita Dubey, WFA's Global Marketer of the Year, the CMO of L'Oreal. But before that, I'll see some of you in Toronto, and I'm really looking forward to that too. Take care. Bye-bye.